Hey guys, and welcome to my Making Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe in Minecraft series. Last episode I covered the basic design for the display. During that though, I mentioned that I would need to devise logic gates in order to control the display. In this video, I plan on designing those gates. To begin, let's look at what a logic gate even is. I'll start by showing you an AND gate. The idea is that on the left here we have two inputs, which I'll arbitrarily call A and B. On the right, we have an output, which is commonly represented as AB. This nomenclature is standard for saying A and B. A valid input for a logic gate is either a 1 or on, or a 0 or off. Our AND gate here will output a 1 or be on if both input A and B are 1s. That's where the name AND comes from. A way to show the functionality of any gate is with a truth table. The idea is that we can have both of our inputs on the left side here and our output on the other side. By entering every possible combination of A and B, we can write what the output will do in each of those states. The combinations that I wrote for the inputs are actually placed in a very particular way. If you convert the numbers 0 through 3 into binary, you can see that the inputs are just those numbers. We'll make our inputs follow this pattern so that they're easy to keep track of later. We could use the input combinations in any order we like, really, but later you'll see that it makes a real mess of trying to simplify very complicated systems like what we'll be making next episode. We just said that an AND gate only turns on, or outputs a 1, when both A and B are on, or 1s. We can use the information to fill in the table and say that the state when A and B are 1, the output will also be 1. Every other state will result in the output being 0. The reason we call it a truth table is that it completely describes the function of any gate. For instance, with this truth table we just made for the AND gate, someone could use this information to create another AND gate based off of just what they see here. Here is an AND gate in Minecraft. This is probably the most efficient design for a gate that can be made. I say this because I couldn't find a simpler design, and there are only 2 redstone ticks of delay, which is a very small amount of delay. Every time that a redstone signal goes through components like a torch, repeater, or comparator, there is a single redstone tick of delay. These are a tenth of a second if your game isn't lagging at all. Because of this, keeping the amount of redstone components down as much as possible is critical for the circuitry to function as fast as possible. I figured I'll explain how this AND gate works. So we have 2 input lines going into 2 blocks, both with redstone torches. If an input is on, its corresponding torch turns off. Only if both input lines are on, and both torches are off, the redstone between the torches turns off. This will allow the output torch to turn on. So what we have is a situation where only if both inputs are on, the output is on. This is exactly what we want with an AND gate. I created a second type of AND gate here. Now, it has more redstone components in it, so it's slower, but it does have some advantages. This gate is able to have a much smaller vertical footprint, which I figure could be important if I ever find I'm starved of vertical space. This is a little less of an intuitive design, but it's still fairly simple. Here we have both of our inputs. They both go into redstone repeaters, which feed into redstone comparators. Both comparators are set into subtract mode. The idea is that in the first comparator here, a redstone block constantly sends a 1 to this side. If the output is on, it also sends a 1, and they cancel each other out and no power is outputted. I then have another similar setup with this input. The idea is if the right input is not active, the comparator outputs a 1. Because of this, it doesn't matter what the left signal is, the output will always be 0. You can think of this as the comparator trying to do 0 minus 1, which just rounds up to be 0 or no output. If the left input is on, the comparator is trying to do 1 minus 1, which is also just 0. So no matter what the left input is, if the right input isn't active, the gate will always output a 0. If the right input is active, though, and the left input is off, then we have a 0 minus 0, which just outputs a 0. But if both inputs are on, we get a 1 minus 0, which outputs a 1. Now this design is definitely a lot harder to wrap your head around than this one, but it's important to know in case I need a physically shorter gate. Let's look at some other types of gates. Another example is an OR gate. This says if that A or B is active, the output will be a 1. We can create another truth table for this gate as well. The inputs we'll call A and B again, and the output has a new type of name. If we write A plus B, this means in digital logic terms, A or B. These names aren't particularly important to understand the gate's functions, but they'll be useful later when we start employing these gates. This gate is actually the easiest one to make. We can just connect the signals together to make a 0 delay gate. This is because if either or both of the signals are on, the output will also be on. If a design was needed where backfeeding was forbidden, what we could do is add repeaters on each input line right before they combine. Backfeeding is when an output line receives a signal as an input. Backfeeding is always undesired and can wreak havoc on a circuit. Perhaps one of the simplest gates is called an inverter, or a NOT gate. This is the symbol for it. If an input is 0, the output's a 1. If the input is a 1, the output's a 0. Here you see that we only have a single input, A. There's actually quite a few Boolean symbols to represent the output, but the one I'm going to roll with is a bar over the A. This just means not A. We actually already made an inverter in our AND gate. By having a signal turn off a redstone torch, we create an inverter. Remember, if a redstone torch receives power on top of it, it shuts off. Here's the completed design of the inverter. Now the last gate I want to make is called an XOR gate, or an exclusive OR gate. The idea of this is that if only one input is on, the output's on. If both inputs are on though, or no inputs are on, the output's off. Here's the truth table for such a gate. Notice that the output is similar to the OR gate, but there's a circle around the plus sign. This denotes an XOR operation as opposed to an OR operation. I'll do a quick flyby of the whole gate here. This is the most complicated gate that we have so far. Let's start with what happens when both inputs are off. In this case, the center redstone torch is on, since neither of the input lines are active to shut it off. The torch can then power the redstone lines below it, which turns off the torches below it. This makes the output a 0, since there's no power at the base. Now, if either the left or right line is on, then the center torch turns off. Also, either the left or right torch, depending on the selected input, will turn off as well. There is one torch though that remains on, so the output will still be active. If both input lines are on though, then the top torch still gets turned off, but the input lines turn off both redstone torches at the base, and the input once again becomes inactive. This gate is probably the least intuitive one, but I hope that it makes enough sense. We can use XOR gates in a variety of things, such as adders, or just to use in the combinational logic we'll cover in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss my use of these logic gates. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask below. Until next time.